Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Sony Cyber-shot DSC-RX100 Mark III on the left and the Alpha A6000 on the right. These are two very different cameras that will inherently be compared by consumers because they do share the same suggested retail price of $799.99. But that $800 price point is just about all they share in common outside of producing some great results. So the first thing I can tell you if you're in the market for either one of these cameras is that you will not be disappointed with the results you get for the price. Keep in mind the A6000 has come down in price a little bit because it has been on the market for a while. The RX100 Mark III, on the other hand, is launching this Friday, June 20th, 2014. So clearly pricing is going to be softer on the older A6000. Also, the A6000 is an interchangeable lens camera with an APS-C class sensor rated at 24 megapixels. Inherently, that does make it the superior device to the Mark III when it comes to overall photographic capability because of sensor size and the ability to throw on all sorts of different glass, both native E-mount, FE, and even legacy glass with adapters. But for today's comparison, we're sticking to the 16 to 50 millimeter power zoom kit lens because odds are if your budget is $800 and you're comparing these, you probably are not going to be buying any other lenses for the time being. So let's start out with the first thing, since I've already established that inherently the A6000 is better with other glass, but not necessarily for you as a user with the kit glass, which is what we're trying to determine today. The first thing I want to point out is form factor. You can see we've got two very different cameras in that one will fit in your pocket. That is the Mark III, much like its predecessors, the RX100 and Mark II, and it has almost every feature you could possibly want from a camera. But this is a fixed lens camera based around a 1-inch sensor that is rear or backlit, and it performs incredibly well. But as I just mentioned, the first thing you'll notice is this is going to make it in a pocket. So if you're looking for that go everywhere solution, the Mark III is the camera to go with. On the other hand, the A6000 isn't going to fit in that same pocket, maybe a cargo pocket, but it still has a pretty small form factor, especially when you take into account its actual capability. And that's what these cameras really do share in common besides price point, is that they do offer best-in-class performance for their size and pricing. So we've established one is larger than the other. Let's talk about the actual sensors. I mentioned that the A6000 has an APS-C class sensor. This is the same size sensor that you'll find in many digital SLRs. This is not a new thing for Sony. This is an Alpha branded camera with an E-mount, but in the past this was once known as an NEX. And essentially you do have many options, as I mentioned before, to go with glass from Sony themselves that are both affordable and expensive depending on what your budget will allow. But this kit lens gets a bad rap, and I have to say, considering the price, the cost, because you can get the kit now for less than the suggested retail of $800, it really does perform exceptionally well while still maintaining the very, I would say, overall small form factor of this camera. But the APS-C sensor, even with that new bump up to 24 megapixels, really does perform well even in low light, which is something many users do not expect when they hear that 24 megapixels has actually been crammed onto an APS-C sensor. 16 was the sweet spot for Sony for many years. Even though the NEX7 did carry that 24 megapixel sensor, this is the first APS-C camera, mirrorless camera from Sony, to sport that same rating again. But it has been retweaked. You do have the Beyond's X processor, which is actually in the Mark III as well. So that's another area where they're very similar in terms of the actual processor, the brains driving the experience. But the A6000 has a lot of advantages, such as its autofocus system. Here we've got a hybrid autofocus system, which Sony introduced a few years back, and it is capable of 11 frames per second continuous autofocus. Now, that is not something you're going to get out of the pocketable RX100 Mark III. But as I'll keep mentioning through the course of this video, if your intent is to really be able to take your camera anywhere, and the difference between you using a camera is the ability to pocket it, then again, the Mark III is always going to be the winner. But if you care more about that autofocus and image quality that the APS-C sensor brings to the table, which is inherently more than the 1-inch sensor, despite the incredible performance that it will produce, that is the Mark III, The A6000 from a sensor standpoint clearly is the winner even with this kit glass. That doesn't mean though that you will not get more pleasing photos with less croppability, less pixel peaking capability out of the Mark III. And that's because the Mark III really does sport something that's similar to a prime piece of glass. That Carl Zeiss 24-70 35mm equivalent with an f1.8 to 2.8 constant aperture really is a stunning piece of glass for a fixed lens camera. And in my mind, probably only second to its full frame brethren, the RX1 and RX10. The RX10 only more impressive because of its range. It doesn't have this sort of aperture range, though. I meant focal. So that's what the A6000's APS-C sensor is all about. The RX100 Mark III, on the other hand, gives you that 1-inch sensor that has become Sony's bread and butter. This is the same sensor that was in the Mark II. It's rear illuminated. It's in the FDR-AX100 4K camcorder that I'm filming this on right now. So it's also in the RX10, and likely will continue to find its way into more Sony products as it becomes even less expensive for them to manufacture because of economies of scale. And really, it just is a fantastic sensor. And that's why Sony has not deviated from using it. What they have improved is the lens. And that is one thing where, in this comparison, clearly the lens that's in the RX100 Mark III is a stunner compared to the kit glass here. And as I mentioned, the kit glass you're getting with the A6000 is very good. It's just not going to give you that same sort of performance that you'll get here on the left. And the actual focal range on them being these two lenses is again very similar, so it fits the comparison, even though the standards are different because one is APS-C and has 1.5 times crop factor, and then I'm not even going to get into the 1-inch sensor crop factor because I don't want to make anyone crazy here today with those technical details. But the lens on here is definitely going to give you the better lens to sensor performance than the kit glass with the A6000. So the A6000 with its sensor is definitely pushing you in a direction to want to upgrade that glass. And that's why I will tell you now, if you do have plans to grow with the camera and actually go beyond the kit, then the A6000 is also definitely the better option. If you want everything done in one solution out of the box, then the RX100 Mark III is the winner. Beyond the actual sensor performance, on the still side, I want to talk about video because I didn't mention that in the A6000 when I was talking about the sensor. Now, the A6000 does have that APS-C sensor, but when it comes to video, believe it or not, the RX100 Mark III is going to outperform the A6000. Not by a tremendous margin, but one that is noteworthy, and that's because the A6000 does have the cleanest video I've seen from any interchangeable APS-C mirrorless Sony camera, and that says a lot, but it still is stuck at that 28 megabits per second AVC HD file format. Whereas with the Mark III, we have the added bonus of XAVC-S, which is 50 megabits per second 1080p footage. So a legitimate increase in quality and capability in the video department. And then when paired with the Zeiss T-Star glass, it's just, you know, something that leads you to wish that you had more focal range, and that's probably why Sony will be bringing out an update to the RX10 in the very near future. But that is an important thing to note about video quality. The RX100 Mark III, when it comes to still in video performance, is giving you everything you'd find, let's say, in the RX10, especially since it does have a viewfinder, which I'll be getting to in a moment, the same one that you've got here in the A6000 and RX10, an OLED viewfinder crammed into this body. But the video quality surpasses what the RX10 is capable of, or the A6000. So that's noteworthy on video quality, if video quality is a concern to you, which it may not be. Again, some people are really only interested in still quality. For me personally, the Mark III's video quality is one of its most compelling features. Now, in terms of stabilization, the Mark III also has 5-axis stabilization. That is not something you're getting with the A6000, and part of that is that one is a Cyber-shot consumer camera, the other is an interchangeable lens system camera. And Sony knows that even though this can shoot great video, this being the A6000, it's still targeted at being a still camera first. The Mark III is really that hybrid one-size-fits-all solution that's going to make every single consumer happy. And that's not to say the A6000 won't as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it really comes down to portability and investment in a system when you make this decision. How serious you are about taking this on as a hobby or just shooting casual shots. When it comes to the speed, the A6000 simply trounces the RX100 Mark III. I mean, it beats most of the competition in the market. That 11 frames per second continuous autofocus is beastly. And you don't have that here. You do have 10 frames with the Mark III, but it's nowhere near as accurate. It doesn't have the hybrid autofocus. You're looking at contrast-only detection, whereas here you've got sensors covering 92% of the actual APS-C sensor, which is astonishing. Beyond that, more physical controls, manual controls, I should say, on the A6000. So that's another good thing, again, if you plan to grow with your camera. Both cameras have Wi-Fi and NFC, both have access to the Sony Play Memory Store, and both of them share very, very similar operating software, as well as, I would say, the overall shooting experience, despite the fact that the A6000 does have the ability to swap lenses and, of course, have more customizable buttons on board. So you can see in terms of form factor here, again, really no comparison in my opinion. One, again, is pocket friendly. The other, you need a big pocket. And I know this from experience because I have carried around NEX or Alpha cameras now in a pocket before with my SCL 10 to 18. I've mentioned this in previous updates. Both have a flash, the flash right here on each camera respectively. The new design of the Mark III puts the flash in the center of the camera where the accessory shoe used to be, and now we've got an electronic viewfinder over here. Basically just have to hit this button right here, which will pop out the EVF, and then you slide it out, and now you have an OLED viewfinder. So pretty neat. Great to have built into the body. I think this is something a lot of users were waiting for. I mean, if you need reading glasses, you've been shooting blind without an EVF. And I know there are so many users out there, consumers, that wanted the RX100 or Mark II. And part of the reason Sony added the EVF option to the Mark II was to accommodate those users that needed an EVF. But the pricing was insane, $450. Now, for an extra $50 over the retail of the Mark II, at least retail, where it started at $750, you've got the built-in viewfinder, and it's the same OLED viewfinder, again, that's in the A6000 and RX10. So while this may sound expensive at $800, between the video capability, the OLED viewfinder, and I haven't even mentioned the fully articulating LCD screen. By fully, I mean 180 degrees of rotation we have now. So you can actually take a selfie, something the A6000 cannot do as well, which isn't that important, but may be to you as a consumer. They've really rounded out this camera into doing just about anything you could possibly want it to do. So no limitations to what the pocket camera can do is my way of summing up what the Mark III represents. The A6000 represents the exact same thing, but in the interchangeable lens camera world, especially the mirrorless world, because we've got that same OLED viewfinder. The display doesn't rotate out, all the way, but you still have that same range of motion that Sony has had on all of their NEX and Alpha cameras for some time now. Solid build quality, which is something that I think doesn't necessarily come at this price point. The Wi-Fi and NFC, as I mentioned before, are a nice added bonus on both of these cameras. Some users will use it. The best free application for both of these is the direct control, the remote control, the smart remote application, and that can be used on iOS or Android. You will need a Play Memories account to do all of this. I've done tutorials on this in the past. Not going to sidetrack on that. Time-lapse, one of my favorite apps. They also have a video grading app that's pretty cool, and you can basically use these apps for either of these cameras. That's something that couldn't be said with the Mark II. That's another reason that this comparison is even more valid than it would have been in years past, because they're on even footing on so many areas, except for the fact that really, well, size, interchangeable versus fixed lens, and then, of course, the sensor size itself, because otherwise they are so similar. I'm going to power both cameras up and essentially just take you into the menu so you can see what they look like. Let me go ahead and actually put this down for a second. Power this one up as well. And in my experience, both cameras really have blown me away. I mean, the A6000, I didn't expect to end up adding to my collection, I'll say, of equipment. It's in my gear bag now. For those of you wondering why there are tags, it's called demo units, folks. These are not necessarily the cameras that I'm keeping, that I'm reviewing for all of you. Whether or not they end up in the bag is another story, and the A6000 has earned that right. The Mark III, though, is going into my pocket, not my bag, I should say. But let me go ahead and I've already got the menu up on the 6000, which you can see right there, and they are very, very similar, and that's why I'm showing you this right now. The menu here on the Mark III, also very similar. So there you have it. The detection from the OLED viewfinder there, determining I was using the viewfinder. That's why it blacked out, for those of you that were curious about that. And I'll go ahead and zoom in here. And you can see the menu systems really are identical. This is a swap that Sony made a little while back, recognizing really with the original RX100 that even though it was part of the Cyber-shot family, it didn't mean that the software had to feel like a toy, essentially. And they brought on that Alpha menu system, and they never looked back. And it's made its way into the all of the Alpha, what used to be NEX cameras, and it's a blessing, especially if you're a new user that never even knew that Sony used to have those menus. You'll be very glad to start off your Sony experience like this. So again, both have the Beyond's X processor, so both operate, again, really very similarly when it comes to responsiveness. Autofocus is the key difference, and again, that sensor size is really the end game differentiation for still quality. But glass is often as important as the sensor, and that's why I will continue to reiterate the quality of this Zeiss lens. Many will say, well, it's not really an f1.8 to 2.8 because of the crop factor and it's dealing with a 1-inch sensor. You can talk about that all day. What I care about is what the images and video that come out of the camera look like, and that's one area where this pocket camera kills everything. And that's the same thing that the A6000 does to much of the competition as well. You're simply not going to find that performance in this body. The speed, the detail, the low light capability, which both of these cameras do astoundingly well, especially with the new glass here. And this is the first RX100 to get a revamping glass, if I didn't mention that. And it's a significant step. In fact, the RX100 Mark III is really, in my opinion, the first true update to the RX100. The Mark II was an incremental step. The Mark III isn't a redesign, but it's certainly a reworking from the ground up. But you can see the software experience very similar. The fact that we've got the same OLED viewfinder. It doesn't have a sensor here, so you don't have that sensor capability with the OLED viewfinder, but still, the fact that we've got almost all of the same features, the capabilities, in such different packages, and yes, there are nuanced differences, sensor quality, all of that, it's inherently going to, as I've said through this video, bring people to drawing some sort of comparison, because these cameras are both really solid performers. You're not going to find bad reviews of either of these, especially not from me, and that's not because I love Sony, even though I do enjoy a lot of their products. You know, a dud is a dud. Neither of these are duds. These are best-in-class photographic tools, and as I mentioned from the beginning, it really comes down to what you actually need. So I've talked about the sensor quality, I've talked about video quality. The RX100 Mark III does have the edge there, even though it's got the smaller sensor than the A6000, and that's no surprise because the FDR-AX100, the 4K camcorder this is being recorded on, has the same sensor as the Mark III. It also has the same XAVCS codec for its highest quality 1080p video, which is another reason I'm hoping the revision of the Mark III includes 4K capture, and it likely will. I mean, Sony's got a year to basically get that straight, despite heat issues and whatever other complications arise. But you really aren't giving up that much when it comes to what you can fit in your pocket. You know, once upon a time, it was a tremendous compromise. In the same way, NEX, now Alpha cameras, were compromises when compared to digital SLRs. And there's no question the A6000 is as close as we've come to digital SLR performance, in fact, besting it, in my opinion, in a mirrorless body, and at a price that now the body alone can be had for under $600, which is just absolutely crazy. So when it comes to budget, if that really is the end game for you, there's no question the A6000 is a whole lot more camera for the price, but you will need to invest in glass. If you're going just based on the kit, then I'm going to say Mark III. I think I've made that obvious through the course of this video, and that's because the actual sensor can only be as good as the glass you put in front of it in many instances. And that's why inherently this camera, its predecessors, have been compared to many NEX, that is mirrorless interchangeable APS-C Sony cameras, since the RX100 launched, because pricing is similar and in many cases performance is in that limited fixed lens range, because again it's so close to prime capability, at least when you take into account the fact that it's in front of a 1-inch sensor. So it all comes down to, at the end of the day, budget, in my opinion, and portability. Do you plan on investing in a camera system? If you do, the A6000 is a fantastic choice. If you want a complete solution that's done, that the only thing you're going to buy in terms of accessories really comes down to a case, maybe the optional grip, then the Mark III is really the best camera ever made. And in my opinion, for most users out there who think they need interchangeable lens cameras, and I'm not talking about hobbyists, enthusiasts, or certainly pros, but the average consumer that wants something better than their smartphone, this may be a lot of money, but you're not going to find anything else like the Mark III other than the Mark I or II. And if you had to ask me right now which is the best to go with for price to performance ratio, clearly the One is the best value, because it offers great performance at the lowest price that you're going to be able to get an RX100. But if you want the best that the line has to offer, the Mark III brings everything that the Mark I think every Mark I user, prospective buyer, would have wanted. So these are two incredible cameras. I did not call this a quick comparison today for all of you sticklers that have a problem with me saying it's quick and then it becomes long. It's the nature of my channel. So even if you guys may only watch for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm detail-oriented. That's the nature of the beast with my reviews. I need to spend more time with the Mark III. I've spent a considerable amount of time with the A6000, and that's why I say the A6000 earned its way into my bag, which says a lot about the capability of this camera. But that's also because it is so inexpensive, as I mentioned before, for that capability. The Mark III, on the other hand, you're definitely paying for all of that engineering and technological design, as opposed to necessarily the raw camera capability. But when I look at something like the RX10, and the fact that really the only difference between this and the RX10 is that we're not getting that extra zoom range. Also, we don't have weather sealing. There are other things, don't get me wrong, but the fact that we now have the same viewfinder, we have the same sensor, and we have an even better lens than the Mark II, the RX100 Mark II, this camera, I was going to say lens, does seem like a value. And I know that may sound nuts, but especially for anyone that is comparing it to what else they could buy at the price point, again, if the best camera you have is the one that travels with you, then the Mark III makes everything look bad. So that's why it is so appealing and will be to every consumer. I mentioned in my unboxing that the beauty of the Mark III is that it really can appeal to just about everyone, whether you're a professional, regular consumer. Everyone sort of meets at that RX100 product line, because you cannot find another camera from another manufacturer that will offer you such quality, such performance, and, by the way, build quality to boot, in this form. With regard to one other thing that I didn't point out, battery life. These do use different batteries. NPBX1, which is the standard Cyber-shot battery, lives inside the RX100 Mark III and all of its predecessors and RX counterparts. The A6000, on the other hand, is going with an older battery, the W series, and essentially when it comes to pricing, I would say both of these are about the same. I'm going to pop out the W so you can see it now. By the way, both also have their SD card storage in the exact same spot, that is in the bottom bay, like you can see right there. And the W series here, you're looking at around 400 to 500 shots, which is really good. So when it comes to battery life, that's another area where the A6000, again, reminds you you're dealing with a whole nother piece of kit than what you're getting with the Mark III, as I almost hit it there with the pancake power zoom. And you can see it powers on and off very quickly. The Mark III, Sony has gone with, as I mentioned before, the NPBX1 right here. And this battery, you're looking at somewhere between 200 and 300 shots. And that really depends on how much you use the LCD screen as opposed to the EVF that I was showing before. That is going to be the determining factor for battery life performance in the Mark III. The Mark I and II don't have an EVF, so it isn't on their to-do list of battery consumption. But otherwise, as I said from the very beginning of this video, these are both amazing cameras. I'm glad to have them both finally and be able to deliver a comparison like this. As I mentioned, when it comes to actual image quality, the 24 megapixels you're going to get here is on another level compared to the 20 you're going to get here because of sensor size. But, again, to me, the Mark III is untouchable because there's nothing else to compare it to. You know, as much as I like the A6000, there are plenty of other people out there that will compare it to competing products. The Mark III, on the other hand, the only competing products are Gen 1 and 2, and that is the beauty of the RX100. So, between Wi-Fi, NFC, solid battery life on both models, both having quality OLED viewfinders, the selfie capability here, I mean, this is clearly a camera designed for a much larger audience than the A6000. But for me personally, if I had to pick one at the end of the day, it would be the Mark III every time. And that's because if I wasn't investing in glass, the A6000 with that kit lens, even though it is a very good piece of kit glass, would end up not being able to live up to the flexibility, capability, and just overall portability, not to rhyme and be cute, that the Mark III brings. And if your camera's not there with you, you don't have the images, folks. That's the bottom line. So as much as I love the ergonomics of the A6000, the speed of the A6000, I hope that that's given you a clear picture of what you need. I mean, both have HDMI out, both have a multi-port, both require charging the camera, or excuse me, the battery on board. Power zoom rocker I didn't mention is right here, and you know, it works well, but I inherently will always feel that the A6000 deserves better glass than the kit lens, and that's where, for anyone who is going to only stick with the kit glass, if you don't care about that incredible speed or extra megapixel count, and I say that again because of the sensor size difference, for the fourth or fifth time, the RX100 Mark III is the camera you should be going with, because it is just the boss when it comes to this sort of price point, capability, and, of course, portability. So, if it seems like I'm enamored with the Mark III, there's a good reason. Sony knew what they were doing, and lately with DI, they're on fire, so this is nothing new. So, two great cameras for much of the same consumers, but at the end of the day, I think it should be really clear which is right for you, especially after watching this video. It's all about what can travel with you and what you're willing to travel with. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.